2 weeks ago, I posted a video where I talked about my thoughts on the story of Wintermute Episode 5. Today, I will be talking about my thoughts on the gameplay. And oh boy, do I have thoughts. I don't want to spend too much time on a long intro here, but I want to say really quick that although I've dabbled with game development and I would like to go into that in the future, I'm absolutely not a professional game designer, so everything I say in this video is just my opinion, and no matter how passionately I say things, that doesn't make it true. And of course, a massive spoiler warning for episode 5, as I will be going into deep detail on the events that occurred within it. But with that said, let's dive straight into the experience that was the gameplay of Wintermute episode 5. I know that I'm not alone when I say that I feel like Wintermute has never contained the best gameplay that The Long Dark has to offer. But that's to be expected when you're adapting a game that has been very open and free choice into a game that is more story-driven. The gameplay of Wintermute episode 5, while promising at the start, quickly began to diminish, ending in a state where it felt like I wasn't even playing The Long Dark anymore. And I believe that that was due to the episode forgetting player expectations, abandoning The Long Dark's core gameplay principles and mechanics, and treating the player like they're stupid. The Long Dark, although originally planned to be Wintermute, was solely a survival sandbox experience for 3 years after the game's official launch. This meant that the game attracted a player base that would typically enjoy games that allow for a lot of player autonomy. Unfortunately, games like that can be challenging to tell a guided story in. When developing Wintermute, Hinterland had to figure out how to take the very unguided experience that their players loved and expected from their game, and add structure to it that would guide them through the story that they wanted to tell. This is an incredibly tough challenge, because they don't have the luxury of designing the game and story from the ground up and letting it fall wherever it does as far as the gameplay story balance is. They instead need to find a sweet spot where they can tell the story they want to tell without moving the game too far from its original spot within the world of gameplay story balance. If it changes too much, then the player's expectations aren't met and instead they're given a very jarring experience. Unfortunately, it's kind of a lose-lose situation. If they don't change the structure at all, Hinterland can't tell the story they want to tell. If they do change it, they have to add some restrictions to a game that typically has little to none, ensuring a less than ideal experience for the player base that The Long Dark has. When given this challenge, I believe that Hinterland did an amazing job. At first. Let's look at Wintermute episodes 1 through 4. There were a decent amount of adjustments, sacrificing a decent amount of the open aspects of the game in order to put more attention on the story. But with that being said, there is something very important to note here, something that episode 5 failed on. It still maintained player autonomy. Each episode of Wintermute takes place within one region, with a notable exception of episode 2, which spans 3, meaning that the world is definitely limited in comparison to survival mode. While your ability to freely explore the world was taken away, your ability to explore the region is not. In each of these episodes, there are side quests that can be explored, and you are still able to interact with most of the survival systems from the sandbox. If you unlock the recipes, you can spend time hunting and crafting for better clothes, even though doing that does nothing to progress the story. But it does give the player familiar options that they know and love from the sandbox for when they need to have a change of pace. In my opinion, Hinterland found the best solution to the problem here. They allow you to freely roam the space given, but restrict that space to be in close proximity to the story. You're encouraged to interact with the story and unlock more equipment with side quests, but as long as you have what you need to eat, drink, sleep, and stay warm, you are free to complete everything at your own pace. This is the strategy that Hinterland seemed to follow, until episode 5. We all know that there were a lot of complications during the development of the light at the end of all things, and it seems to me that the struggle is directly reflected in the gameplay. Throughout the episode's 4 acts, the game etches its way farther and farther to being a linear, story-focused experience. This isn't inherently a bad thing, and we knew that this episode was going to be far more linear. But the problem was that more and more of the fundamental aspects of The Long Dark were removed or put on hold to make way for the story. And in doing so, caused episode 5 to not feel like it was even the same game anymore. Let's start by talking about the first act. I found the first act to be the strongest, and the one that I enjoyed the most. It starts off with a lot of story-based tasks, but gives them all to you at once so you can choose which ones you want to address first. During this act, the game puts all of the cards on the table and lets you decide which card is the most interesting. That freedom to choose how you want to handle the many challenges before you is, in my opinion, fundamental to not just Wintermute's gameplay, but the Long Dark as a whole. Next, you're put into the Perseverance Wilds with one task: find the 3 missing people. You can approach that task however you want to. You can find them in any order, and there are quite a few buildings that can be searched and explored with no relevance to the task at hand. I personally found myself setting up the materials to craft a wolfskin coat later in the chapter because I was just exploring and found myself with the opportunity to do so. Not only does this section give us the freedom that Wintermute has typically provided us, but the task we are given actively encourages us to explore. Unfortunately, once you find the missing people, you won't really be given that freedom again. After that, you're put on a very linear path to reach the Fukatsumaru. Although you aren't really given much choice on where to go, you do still maintain the freedom of setting your own pace. You can sleep, eat, hunt, pass time, explore, by your own volition while on the path. And that is how the rest of Act 1 plays out. Despite the fact that the second half is very linear, it didn't feel bad to me while I was playing it because I was given sections that were more open. Having areas of the story that are linear works, but only in moderation. But after Act 1, that moderation is nowhere to be found. Instead, we are shoved over and over into tasks that provide us with no options on how we want to go about them, taking away even our ability to choose the rate at which we want to proceed. The beginning of Act 2 is where we start to see the core game mechanics be taken away or twisted. After Act 1 of Episode 5, you're not allowed to sleep. The only time that Mackenzie sleeps is during the dream sequence cutscene. Before you get to that point, you have to rely on finding an energy drink, or some other item that might give you some temporary fatigue gain, in order to keep your bar from being empty. The idea here seems to be that you're supposed to keep moving. You won't need to worry about fatigue because if you don't stop moving and continue through the story, you'll have all the rest you need. The problem with that mindset is that it's completely contrary to how Wintermute has played until this point. Instead of determining our pace, we have to go forward, and this is reflected in the map design. For the first section of the act, all you get to do is walk, sometimes get interrupted by a cutscene or dodge some wolves, and get to your destination. You have to go forward, and if you stop, you have to deal with an empty fatigue bar. At this point, all I could think about while I was playing was, yup, I'm being railroaded hard. So, to solve the fatigue issue, you instead are given an overabundance of emergency stims and military stims. But this fix felt extremely bad to interact with. In the Long Dark, you are taught that emergency stims are a tool to be used as a last resort. The military stims were an item designed as an ugly fix to the fatigue issue that prohibiting sleeping would cause, by having them refill your survivor's fatigue meter with no downside. However, when I was playing through this act, I didn't use them until my chat told me they had no downside. Why? Because as a longtime player of the Long Dark, I know that stims are emergency tools, so introducing a new item with a similar design and name made me think that it was also an emergency tool. All of this begs the question, why all the rushing? Well, to me it seems like it was because this part of the story is meant to happen within a matter of days. So to make the timeline make sense, you have to find a way to force the player to move fast, right? To answer that question, I want us all to take a look at a very different game. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Despite the fact that these two games are very different, there are some key similarities that can help shine some light on this problem. In Breath of the Wild, after Link raises the first Sheikah Tower at the beginning, Zelda says,
"You must hurry, Link, before it's too late."
To further reinforce that, you are constantly told how little time is left, that you have to hurry, all throughout the main storyline of the game. Despite that, you as the player are never forced to rush. You are free to take things at your own pace and explore when you want to. And this works because when playing games like Breath of the Wild that have a story but feature very open gameplay, there is an understanding that the rate at which you progress through the story doesn't change the way that the story is paced. You could spend 5 years of real-life time before finishing the main story in Breath of the Wild, and when somebody asks you what the game's about, a vast majority of players would still walk away to say, this is a game where Link awakes after being asleep for 100 years and has to hurry to fight his way through Hyrule to save Zelda before it's too late. The story they tell is communicated in the time frame they mean for it to be in, even though us as players might have worked through it at a slightly different pace. Now, let's take a look at Episode 3 of Wintermute, specifically during the Coming Storm section of the chapter. We see the same effect. You are tasked with finding 3 survivors and bringing them back to the community hall before they die. Obviously, within the story, this is a time-sensitive situation. But to preserve the gameplay that the players expect from the game, they don't enforce that time limit. If you're in desperate need of food, then you can focus on solving that problem first before searching for survivors. Despite the fact that you can take as long as you want, I feel like most players would still describe this section as Astrid has to collect supplies and find survivors before the storm hits. It is still conveyed that there is a time concern within the story. So, to go all the way back to our question from before, is the only way to make the timeline of the story make sense to rush the player? No! It is clear that in other games, and even the earlier episodes of Wintermute, that you can tell a story with a tight timeline without forcing the gameplay to match it. Episode 5 is meant to take place roughly 7 to 10 days after the start of Episode 1, and despite the fact that I spend well over that amount of time in-game in each episode, I know and feel that in the story. Despite the fact that I took way more time in-game than the story intends, I don't look at the characters and their interactions thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, that was 30 days ago. I still see it within the intended timeline. Forcing the player to go faster by removing their ability to sleep is a completely unnecessary step that only causes frustration. If you really needed to make sure that we couldn't sleep, then you honestly should have just removed the fatigue bar entirely. But even that wouldn't have been a good idea because it goes against what The Long Dark is. The Long Dark is a survival game, and survival, when it comes down to it, is just a game of problem solving. In the sandbox mode, you're constantly given problems that need to be solved. Running low on food, freezing, dangerous wildlife blocking your path, and the game is finding out how to solve all those problems before one kills you. This is the gameplay that the player base loves, and we have seen Hinterland be able to keep it while telling a story in the first 4 episodes of Wintermute. Let's return to our earlier metaphor with having the cards on the table for a second, where each card is a problem that you need to solve. In the sandbox, there are cards put on the table and more continue to show up as you play. Your goal is to address the cards before they kill you. The cards never stop coming, but if you play the game right, you can address them as they come and survive forever. In the earlier episodes of Wintermute, the game remained largely the same. The only difference was that there was now an additional card on the table, the story. But this card wouldn't kill you if you ignored it for too long. It was simply something that you could try to resolve when you had the time and energy to do so. This works. Now let's look at Act 2 of Episode 5. Here, the dealer wipes all the cards off the table and then places one singular one in the middle, the story. When the problem of fatigue shows up, instead of being able to pivot and address it like normal, the dealer grabs the card and says, no, this only goes away when you finish the story. This is not the same game. Instead of being given the free will to choose what you want to do and where, you are driven forward by the story and everything you do is for the story. Now, that being said, there isn't anything inherently wrong with that. There are many great titles such as The Last of Us that utilize that type of gameplay very well. The problem is that it's a complete switch up from the game that people have been playing and expecting until this point. And that problem is only exacerbated when Mackenzie has to run to the thermal power stations. You don't get to sleep, and instead are given a bunch of military stims. You then have to run through linear pathways and shoot all of the wolves in his way. During this portion of the act, the game says, no, you don't get to choose if you want to sneak by, blast your way through, find a better pathway, because the wolves are everywhere and they'll attack you on sight. Also, you can't go slow because you now have a time limit of a couple in-game hours or so, or else you fail and have to restart. It doesn't just stop there. You have to move so fast and are given so much loot that you never even need to think about food, water, or warmth. So we end up with a sizable section of the act where we don't have to do anything to manage our warmth, hunger, thirst, or fatigue, which is all of our main survival elements. Instead, we're given a run-and-gun boomer shooter. There is a lot more I could say on Act 2, but I fear that I've been rambling a bit too long and we still have to cover 2 more acts. So let's move on to Act 3. When swapping back to Astrid for Act 3, I was a little hopeful that I would get some of the better gameplay back like there was in Act 1 and previous Wintermute episodes, but I was immediately disappointed. Mathis sends Astrid to go get medical supplies, which are meant to be held at an outpost north of Desperation Bay. I thought that we'd have to make our way back through Desperation Bay, find a path through the north side of the region, and then continue on to the supplies. That would allow us some time to actually travel, have to manage survival, and it would give us a breather from the heavy, railroaded gameplay. Instead, Astrid is immediately teleported to the train yard, continuing the streak of railroading. Pun intended. Some may think that having us walk all the way there wouldn't have worked because then we'd have to drag Heller all the way there, but I strongly disagree. Heller never intended on going all the way with us, immediately saying that he knows Astrid will come back because she won't leave her friends to die. So they easily could have just had us bring Heller to the lighthouse in Desperation Bay, right at the very beginning of the journey, and have him decide to stay there instead, a far cozier spot than outside at a fire barrel. I know that I and many others were very excited for the train, which is very adorably named Goose. Fixing Goose up and finding a way into the building was very fun and in character for Wintermute. But what followed I really hated. I may be in the minority here, but I felt that the train section dragged on for way too long. I went back and combed through my stream where I played through Act 3. Not including the opening and closing cutscenes, Act 3 took me 63 minutes to complete. Of those 63 minutes, 33 were spent on the train. That is over half the time in the act spent on the train, which maybe could have worked if the mechanics of the train were any fun to interact with. But no, they weren't. Here's the gameplay loop of the train. Add coal, move the train. If there's something in the way, move the train faster to break through it. If there's a switch track, then get out and switch the track. If you run out of coal, get off and grab more coal. This would have been fine for maybe 10 minutes, but 33 minutes of go, stop, swap track, grab coal, go, stop, swap track, grab coal became so grating so fast. On top of that, this act has the same problems that Act 2 had with survival. You cannot sleep, you are given so many supplies that you never have to worry about food or water, and you spend the time on the train next to the boiler, which keeps you warm the entire time. You spend no time worrying about or interacting with any survival mechanics. What's even worse is that time is frozen during this act. This also happened a good bit in Act 2 as well, but I'm mentioning it here because I found it to be way more noticeable in this act. Because you're supposed to be hurrying, and everything has to align perfectly for the finale that takes place when you get back, the game freezes the progress of time and only progresses it at set trigger points when you advance the story. This amount of forcing the timeline of the gameplay to fit the narrative is incredibly noticeable and unnecessary. Like I mentioned before, the survivors that we rescued in episode 3 of Wintermute stay alive until we find them. We weren't rushed to find them, and it didn't ruin the story. We don't need to be rushed to save Donner. Plus, as I mentioned in my video on the story, which you should watch if you haven't, I'm pretty happy with that video, so, if you haven't gone to see it, then go see it after this one, that'd be pretty cool. If Donner could survive starving and without water and solitary for over a week, and then make it to Perseverance Mills while bleeding internally and be fine, I think it's okay if it takes us a couple more in-game days to retrieve the supplies. One of the most frustrating things about the gameplay from this chapter that I haven't mentioned yet is how patronizing it felt while playing it. Throughout Acts 2 to 4, the game treats the players like they're stupid, often giving no time at all for us to try to solve things ourselves, and it happens even in areas that aren't puzzles. One of the most egregious examples of this is when Jace and Mackenzie reach the end of the mine in Act 2. There's a giant door that has 2 wheels to turn in order to open it. Jace yells about wanting to get out and runs to the door, grabbing one of the handles. This is already way more than enough to indicate to the player that they should walk up and interact with the other handle to progress. But instead of letting you piece it together and do it yourself, we have this moment. This is a clip from my stream when I played through this moment, and you can literally see me here walking up to that door and trying to interact with it. I already know that I'm going to need to do that, but I'm literally not able to because I have to wait for Jace to tell me to do it. It's very common in games where the player has a companion for the companion to occasionally nudge the player if they seem stuck. Let's look at God of War, for example. If you're taking a while on a puzzle, and the game thinks there's a chance that you're stumped, Atreus might say something along the lines of, "Try that rope over there." The key difference is that the game will give you the time to do it yourself first. If Jace was going to tell you to come over and open the door, there should have been at least a minute or so where she's standing there holding the handle, implying the solution, before she says something. Another example of this is during the train section in Act 3. During your time spent repairing the train and getting it going, you learn how it functions, that you need to keep the PSI up to keep the train going. I would expect that you as the player would need to keep an eye on that because otherwise the train might stop in a dangerous spot. But instead of having the player do that, Astrid will say something telling you to keep the PSI up the moment it starts to get even a little bit low. There's no time for you to figure out what's wrong or solve the problem as a player. It is just told to you. It felt like I was being backseat gamered, but the gamer backseating me was the game that I was playing. But the absolute worst example of this, the magnum opus of patronization from this episode, comes from what I consider to be the worst sequence in all of Wintermute. Most of you probably already know where this is going. This entire sequence felt extremely jarring and contrived. Let's talk about the first thing that bugs me with this sequence: forcing the characters to make stupid decisions to set up the outcome. When Will gets on the gondola, he is halfway between both sides of the river. It would be just as easy to go back to Jace and have them get on the same gondola car. In fact, it would have been easier. If he had gone back and grabbed Jace with his gondola car, he would have moved a total of 1.5 lengths of the gondola. But by going back first, he makes it so that he has to go 2.5 lengths of the gondola. This decision simply makes no sense. How about the next thing? The convicts show up and shoot at Jace and Will. They miss, so both Jace and Will hurry to... Oh, wait, no. That's right. They sit in the open and talk leisurely for a minute. Like, what? The main problem with this scene can be described in one word: urgency. There is none. These two have guns pointed at them, and they're standing, talking. Even when Jace starts firing the flare gun, the convicts meander off-screen instead of, shooting back with their real guns or threatening their hostage. Will then walks slowly over to the gondola to deliver 3 very slow blows to it. The gondola collapses, except of course for the one rope that stays up so that Will can climb across, and the convicts actually hit a shot, but the hard case blocks it. Will falls onto the other platform, and then Jace aims the flare gun at the convicts for what feels like ages before shooting, during which time neither convict moves to dodge the shot. I'm not even going to get into asking how on earth a flare knocked a convict off the platform, or why neither one of them shot at Jace despite the fact that they've established that Mathis doesn't care if she dies. There are honestly too many things wrong with this sequence to talk about in depth. The entire thing needed to be about 3 times faster. Nobody in this scene is acting like they're actually scared for their life. But honestly, I have a bigger gripe with this scene, and it's not something that falls to just Wintermute. This happens throughout a lot of media. And it's the common writing pitfall of giving enemy guns equals create tension and urgency. I am a firm believer in what I'm about to say. You should never, ever give a character a gun unless you are ready to kill or severely injure one of the people on the other end. Guns are lethal weapons, and they are honestly not that hard to aim, especially if you have used them before, which it's safe to say from their shooting posture that these convicts probably have. If you give any character a firearm and have them shoot it, they should either be so inexperienced with shooting a gun that they don't even know how to hold the thing, or they should hit something. It's quite literally the stormtrooper effect. Not a single person I know thinks that stormtroopers are actually threatening or scary because all they do is miss every shot in a majority of scenes that they're in. When you have these two convicts show up, miss all of their shots, and then continue to shoot at and hit nothing while you slowly crank the gondola over to them, then why the hell am I supposed to be scared of them? Now, I don't want to just criticize without offering a solution, because if I do that, then I'm just complaining, and there's nothing productive in that. I feel like there is an incredibly easy solution to this problem. Imagine that instead of guns, one convict had a hatchet, and the other one has a bow and arrow. When the convicts show up, the bow is drawn and aimed near our dynamic duo. The convict yells at them to stop moving and tells Mackenzie to get over to them. All the while, the bow is drawn and pointed right at him. The threat is there. It is imminent. It is currently in their face. As Will makes his way over to them, they yell something along the lines of, "I'm not playing around here, pilot," to keep the threat alive. Now, once Will is over with the convicts and Jace shoots the flare gun, the convict with the hatchet can say, "What are you doing? Shoot at her." Then the one with the bow can respond with, "You know I suck at aiming this thing." And then they take cover. This fixes so many contrivances from this sequence. Since they aimed the bow but didn't shoot it, they are essentially bluffing. But Will and Jace have no reason to assume that he can't shoot them with the bow. They could try to call his bluff, but if they're wrong, they get shot with the bow. It's not a risk worth taking. So they obey. But once Jace shoots and Will learns that the guy can't use the bow, it opens the door for him to be able to destroy the gondola and try to climb across. After all, if the guy sucks with the bow, maybe he has a shot of making it to the other side. But then the convict hits a lucky shot, hits Will in the back where the hard case is, and the scene can play out normally from that point on with Will hitting the platform on the other side. Oh, actually, no, get rid of the convict dying. It makes zero sense that the flare knocked him off the edge. But anyways, I think you get the point, so I won't talk your ear off about this sequence anymore. Instead, we're gonna move on to the final thing that I want to talk about today, which is Act 4. I want to first acknowledge that this is a very linear act. Not even very, it is a completely linear act. As I said before, I think that sections like this work as long as they have open gameplay surrounding them. This one obviously doesn't. But if it did, I would have no problem with how linear this sequence is. No, my problem is how hard it is to stay immersed in this act. First of all, you spawn in with nothing except your clothes. I understand why you wouldn't want Will to use weapons in this section. Narratively, it would attract too much attention and the convicts could swarm him. Game design-wise, it would trivialize the section to be a shooting game. Good thing that doesn't happen at all in this episode. But the point is, they should have had something there to communicate that. Instead of having Will whisper to himself, "I can't afford to make that much noise," when you try to equip a gun, you instead just have all of your stuff taken away with no explanation. Like with the fatigue from earlier, if you have no intention of letting us interact with a mechanic, then just take it away. There is no reason to use your inventory in this act. So if you're going to take away all of our items, then just don't let us look in our inventory, because you've essentially removed the mechanic already. But the biggest problem in the gameplay here is how absolutely brain dead the convicts are. Literally the very first convict that I had to sneak by, I saw where he was looking and thought, "Oh, okay, I gotta find a way around so he doesn't see me." I tried going up to the rocks, invisible wall. I tried walking along a different path. It was blocked off. So I decided to try to walk in front of him to see what would happen. And Like, come on. What happened? He's looking straight at me. I can see this guy better with my glasses off at twice the distance he is from me. It's such an easy fix too. Just have him turn around. If we get too close or make too much noise, he'll make the typical, "What was that?" and turns around. If you haven't ducked behind cover at that point, then game over, try again. But instead, he's just staring at us. And it happens all throughout the act. It is just really disappointing to be in the climactic finale of the story. The town is on fire, convicts are everywhere, but the people I'm supposed to be afraid of can't see 10 feet in front of them. It completely took me out of the experience. The cherry on top is that the mechanic they introduce, choking out the convicts, isn't even something that you get to freely use either. Having the option to choke out the convicts does something very important to the game. It offers different strategies that can be used to complete the act. You can go as stealthy as possible, or as violent as possible. Maybe you think that Will would want to take out as many of these guys as he could. Maybe the opposite. It opens up different potential playstyles. Or at least it would, if we were actually allowed to play around with it. But when I tried to do just that, this happened. This is, in my opinion, the biggest no-no when it comes to game design. Punishing your players for trying to experiment with the tools you give them. I knew that that convict was in an opposite direction from where I was supposed to go. I knew that I didn't need to choke him out, but I wanted to play Will as a guy who would take out as many convicts as he could. Letting me take out this convict wouldn't have done anything to harm the experience or alter the story. Once again, it just feels so patronizing. I try this thing out and the game says, "Oop, no, that must have been a mistake. That's the wrong way. Here, let's reset you and you can try again." I know that this isn't the correct way, but that doesn't mean that I need to be punished for going that way. Even if I didn't know that that was the wrong way, there is already a natural consequence, which is that I don't get to where I need to be. Once I realize that, I would correct it and find my way back. But I'm not even provided with that choice either. As I said in my video on the story of Wintermute, I thought that the story played out well, but I cannot say the same for the gameplay. I still feel that episodes 1 through 4, and even Act 1 of episode 5, found a great balance of story focus and open options, but that essence was completely abandoned in Acts 2 to 4, resulting in a patronizing experience that felt alien, unsatisfying, and frustrating. I've seen a lot of people say that they think episode 5 should get a redux like episodes 1 and 2 did way back when, but I disagree. While I think a redux could definitely improve a lot, I think that Hinterland, and myself as well, are ready to be done with Wintermute and move on to other things. I am incredibly excited for Black Frost because Hinterland has shown us time and time again how good they are at crafting and designing survival systems and environments for open exploration. So I don't think we'll have to worry about the gameplay there at all. But with that being said, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, then thank you so much for watching. I know that this was a long one, but I had a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I even cut out a bunch of it. I had a whole page talking about game design as a whole, but in the end it kind of felt like I was diving into a different topic for a different day. But hey, if you liked the video, then like the video. It helps out the channel a lot. If you want to see more from me, then grab the nearest fish and slap that subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.